The problem wasn't LA, the problem was me. I thought when I left LA and came to Raleigh, it was going to fix me. I thought I'd get here and I would find a slower, saner, more sustainable rhythm of life. But when I got here, I quickly learned what we've been saying in this series. The problem wasn't that I was in LA. The problem was LA was in me. Now, until I could see that, I couldn't even start working on my problem. Now, I'm not alone. The tyrannous soul draining that we saw in the last episode, it only loses its grip on us when we can see it, name it. Naming the problem is the first step to making change. So here's my story. I arrived in Raleigh ready to start a church. Now, coming here, I imagined Raleigh was Mayberry. That's the only thing I knew about North Carolina, living in Southern California. I just knew it had to be a slower life. But that first year, damn, I started a church from scratch, no team, barely a budget. Not only was my career in this one basket, so was my income, so was groceries for my kids, and that is pressure. And what that pressure revealed was what was really in me. And what was in me? All the toxic doctrines we've been talking about, all the unspoken assumptions that we all carry around. Now, in our very last month of funding, we became financially viable. Viable is a generous word, but it did mean I didn't have to go get a second job. And with that little bit of room to breathe, I could stand back and assess the craziness of that first year. And what I saw was me. I saw myself living frenetically, having very little return from my efforts, driven by those internal doctrines. I saw the damage that I had done to myself, to my body and my soul, and to my marriage. And I also saw that we became financially viable not because of any of my frenetic efforts. Not at all. Now, I couldn't see the whole picture that we've been talking about in these episodes, but I did see that the problem was in me. Back then, I said it that way. The problem was not that I was in LA. The problem was LA was in me. Now, that was my first step to stumbling my way out of the frenetic, stumbling my way into a community of rest, recognizing that the problem was in me. It's not much, but it was clarifying. The 12 steps tell us that the first step to healing is to recognize the problem. And once I saw that the problem was in me, I realized that the work was going to be internal work. I realized that the work of discerning would be, I had to figure out what was driving me. What did I believe unconsciously? What did I assume unconsciously that was not serving me well? And what was my deepest hunger, my truest hunger, the one so deep I couldn't even name it? In hindsight, I realized that mine was a hunger to reclaim a way of being communal and a way of being spiritual that was anchored in how our bodies actually work and how our minds actually work and how our communities actually work. So that was the first thing I did, recognizing the problem was in me. My next step, I suspect there's a better way. My next step seems rather unimpressive. I started gathering pithy little quotes, and I would pin them up on my wall. These were quotes that pointed me toward rest. Now, here's the problem. I couldn't do the quotes. All they were was aspirations up on my wall. Here's one of them. It was on my wall for a long time. Thomas Merton. It is enough to be an ordinary human, to hunger and sleep, to rise and go to bed, to put on blankets and take them off, to make coffee and drink it, to read and meditate and work and pray. It is enough. It is enough to live as our fathers and mothers lived on this earth until eventually we die. Now again, I couldn't live that quote. Ordinary human living, that was not enough. I had a church I needed to plant. But the quote spoke to me, and it pointed me in a different direction. It asked me to stop and question my most basic instincts. Now again, I couldn't do the quote, couldn't even really understand the quote, but it stood there as a signpost pointing me to, don't do that thing you're instinctively thinking about doing. Don't build that way that you know how to build. Don't work that plan that you just made. Don't do what you know how to do. I arrived in Raleigh with a 3-ring binder. I got it at a seminar, the Church Planter's Toolkit. It had 9 sections in this binder, each section cleverly titled, a shiny cover on the outside. Do these 9 things and you will plant a church. Now, they were good things. And if I had done those 9 things, I would have planted a church. I wasn't that skilled at discernment at that point in my life, but I was skilled enough to doubt my most basic instincts. If I do those 9 things, things I know how to do, things I have learned how to do, I will plant a church. But I just came from a church, a good church, and it was exhausting. And I just spent a year figuring out that the problem was in me. What are the chances if I do those 9 steps, I will build the community that I dream about? Slim. So I didn't. I didn't do those good things, and I didn't do a bunch of other good things that good church planters do. We were actually the church of not much going on. Well, after some time of being that, I had breakfast with a guy, and he said it. He said it to me. We've heard about your church. We call you the do-nothing church, which surprised me to hear someone else say it out loud, but it was an apt description. We really only did 4 things. We watched over our young children carefully. We watched over our money carefully. We had to. I did Sunday lessons, and we built friendships, deep friendships. And that was it. We only ever added another good thing when something gripped us deep, like a spiritual impulse kind of gripping. And there weren't many of those in the early years. Over the years, there were quite a few, but in those early years, there weren't many even of those. Now, in other videos, I'll tell you about what those other things were: practices of silence and unhurried community, more rhythm, less project, more listening, less saying. But what was most important at that season was what we did not do. Our music really needed help. No, we didn't do that. Our middle schoolers wandered the hallways on Sundays. I would talk with the kids occasionally, others would too, but we had no program, we had no class. Now, many of those kids were with us all the way through college, and they talked about those days, the best church experiences they ever had. But what that guy said, it was true. We were the do-nothing church, but it wasn't completely true. We weren't doing nothing. We just weren't doing that. And that is all the normal stuff that churches do. We were learning the way of quietness. We were learning the way of stillness. We were learning the way of close spiritual friendships. We were learning different doctrines like it is enough to live as human beings live. We were unwiring late-stage capitalism doctrines. We didn't know those words, but those things that had been soaked into our brains were coming looser. We didn't even realize, but what we were learning was how to discern our way forward. A friend of mine said during those years, Doug, sometimes you like to go fast. And if you want to go alone, okay, go fast. But if you want us to go together, go slower. Now, that was really helpful because slower, it turns out, is a precondition for discerning. So our guiding principle became do those 4 things and don't do anything else unless we have one of those interior impulses. And if we do that thing, a group or a ritual or a discussion, and if it gives us life, learn from it, grow toward it, move in that direction. If it doesn't give us life, drop it immediately. Now that's kind of a dummy's guide approach to discernment. Slow down, look for life, go that way. Discernment. And that was how we became, over time, a nonconformist community, a community of rest. A few of the other pithy quotes that ended up on my wall: enough to do and enough time to do it. That one was a big one for me personally because it spoke to a deep desire inside of myself to live a sustainable pace of life, a pace that I could walk for 25 years. Another one, distinguish between doing things right and doing the right things. In other words, go slowly enough to be able to do that. Now, I couldn't have told you why these quotes spoke to me. In hindsight, I can. They were pointing me toward being that kind of community, that kind of restful community. I didn't have a big grand plan to deconstruct and then reconstruct religion. I was just figuring out how not to hurt and how not to hurt the people in our community. I couldn't name the doctrines of late-stage capitalism at the time. I couldn't see the underlying narratives that drive us. I just knew we were exhausted. And I had a few quotes on my wall. They were small steps. But as we saw in the last episode, small steps are no small thing. When we enter into new territory without roadmaps, when we need new perspectives, all we have are small steps. Okay, in the next episode, I'll talk to you about Sundays because Sundays nearly killed us. We'll talk about exhaustion. So if you'd like to be notified when that goes live, subscribe.